out of here, damn cat! Every single night, same spot. What the hell do you want?
Biscuit. Why here, girl? Every night, this exact wall. What's inside there?
In the historic old money heart of Savannah, Georgia, in the most beautiful oak-lined district of Ardsley Park, where the mansions cost millions of dollars, the cars in the driveways were imported from Europe, and the iron gates stood so tall that even the sky inside seemed to belong to a different world. There stood one mansion that was the largest and oldest of them all, the mansion of Harrison Whitfield III. 70 years old, silver-haired, always dressed in a crisp white linen shirt with a small gold cross pinned to his collar, the wealthiest textile and cotton tycoon in the entire state of Georgia. 4 mills across the south, 2 downtown shopping plazas, and a mansion that looked like a palace from the outside, and something else entirely from the inside. Harrison Whitfield donated the largest check at every church fundraiser, gave the biggest gift at every society wedding, and across Savannah people spoke his name with lowered voices and lowered eyes. Mr. Whitfield, that man is a saint, a true servant of the Lord. But the man of God had been hiding a secret behind the western wall of his mansion for 40 long years, and that secret was locked in a sealed room, breathing, waiting, hoping. On the other side of Savannah, past the railroad tracks, past the old cotton warehouses and the shuttered paper mill, lay a forgotten little trailer park called Pine Hollow. Broken window screens, rusted metal siding, open drainage ditches, stray dogs, and flies on every porch. In a single wide trailer at the far end of that park lived a 23-year-old boy named Tyler Brooks. Thin, sun-darkened, with the tired eyes of a young man who had learned too early that nobody in this world was coming to help. Tyler was a scrap collector. Every morning at 5 o'clock, he would sling a heavy canvas sack over his shoulder and walk the alleys of Savannah, the construction sites, the backlots of restaurants and auto shops, picking up aluminum cans, copper wire, anything the city had thrown away. Every evening he sold it all at the recycler on Gwinnett Street and came home with $15 or $20 folded into his pocket. That was the life. That was all the life there was. Tyler's mother, Mary Brooks, had passed away 2 years ago. Breast cancer, caught too late, treated at the county hospital because there was never any insurance money for the good clinics. One quiet November night, she had simply closed her eyes in that hospital bed and never opened them again. Tyler's father had disappeared long before Tyler could remember his face. He left when you were just a baby, honey, his mother had told him once, and she had never spoken of the man again. But when Mary Brooks died, she left Tyler one thing that truly mattered. A small brown cat named Biscuit. Biscuit had always slept in Mary's lap, always followed her through every room of the trailer, always pressed herself against Mary's chest in the long chemotherapy nights. And after Mary was buried in the cheap county cemetery, Biscuit followed Tyler the exact same way. Quiet, loyal, always there. But Biscuit was not a normal cat. During the day, she was sweet and ordinary, sleeping in the trailer window, purring on Tyler's pillow, batting at moths on the porch. But every single night, at exactly 12 o'clock midnight, Biscuit would wake up, slip out through the torn screen door, and run. Not to the woods, not to the fields. She would run 3 full miles across Savannah, across the railroad tracks, all the way to Ardsley Park, all the way to the western brick wall of Harrison Whitfield's mansion. And there, at the same exact spot on that 12-foot wall, Biscuit would climb up onto a stone ledge and scratch. Scratch hard. Scratch the old brick for hours with her small, desperate claws. The night guards chased her with buckets of water, with sharp kicks, with stones flung into the bushes. Biscuit would retreat 5 minutes and come right back to the same spot. 3 full years. Not a single night missed. Not one. Tyler had not noticed at first. Cats wander at night. Cats hunt mice. Cats do strange things. But when he finally realized that Biscuit was traveling 3 whole miles every single night to the brick wall of the richest man in all of Savannah, something cold turned inside his stomach. Girl, why there? Of all the walls in this city, why that one? And then a memory came back to him, like a slow tide. The last week, of his mother's life. Mary Brooks, pale and thin in her hospital bed, had gripped Tyler's hand suddenly and whispered something strange through cracked, dry lips. "Baby boy, don't you ever let Biscuit go." That cat knows something. She knows something I never got the chance to tell you myself. Tyler had asked her what she meant, but Mary had slipped back into the morphine fog, and a week later she was gone. And that unfinished sentence had died with her in that hospital bed. But Biscuit kept running. Every single night. For 3 years. Without one single break. Tyler decided, finally, one Tuesday night, just after midnight, to follow her, across the railroad tracks, through the sleeping streets of downtown, all the way to Ardsley Park. And when he crouched in the shadows across the street and watched Biscuit climb that stone ledge and start scratching the western wall of the Whitfield mansion, Tyler listened hard. And between the soft, frantic scratching of his cat's claws, he heard something else, something that stopped his breath cold and froze him where he stood. A slow, faint, steady tapping from inside the wall. Knock, knock, knock. Somebody, somewhere behind that 12-foot wall, was knocking back. Tyler Brooks did not sleep 1 minute that entire night. He walked home to Pine Hollow, with Biscuit trotting beside him, climbed into his narrow bed in the single-wide trailer, and stared at the stained ceiling until the first grey light of dawn crept through the torn window screen. Knock, 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 knock. The sound kept playing inside his skull like a broken record. Somebody was alive behind that brick wall. Somebody was knocking. And a small brown cat named Biscuit had been the only creature in all of Savannah who had heard it. The next night Tyler went back. Same time, just after midnight, he followed Biscuit across the railroad tracks, across the sleeping downtown, all the way to the western wall of the Whitfield mansion. And he pressed his ear against the cold brick in the exact same spot where Biscuit was scratching, and he heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, weak, but steady. Like a human fist. Very tired. Very old. Tapping the other side of a wall that nobody ever walked past. On the third night, Tyler brought his phone. He held the microphone flat against the brick and recorded for 15 straight minutes. When he played it back later in his trailer with the volume turned all the way up, the knocking came through. Real. Not a dream. Not imagination. A human being, somewhere behind that 12-foot brick wall, was tapping for help. And then Tyler did something dangerous. The very next afternoon, when the sun was high and the mansion guards were dozing in their booth near the front gate, Tyler walked quietly around to the back of the estate, along the service alley where the garbage trucks came, and he examined the western wall closely for the first time in daylight. What he saw made his stomach twist. The plaster was eaten away in that one exact spot, 3 feet above the ground, in a perfect circle the size of a dinner plate. 3 years of a cat's claws had worn away the outer finish. 2 of the old red bricks behind were visibly loose. Tyler glanced around, his heart hammering, and he wiggled the top brick with his fingers. It slid out into his hand with a soft grinding sound. And behind that brick, there was not solid wall. There was a narrow, dark space, a gap, a hollow. The wall was double-layered. An outer brick shell, and then an inner wall behind it, and in the beam of his cheap flashlight Tyler could see, about 2 feet back in the darkness, the edge of an old iron door, rusted hinges. A corroded padlock, a door that had not been opened in decades. Tyler slid the brick back into place with shaking hands, walked home with his canvas sack over his shoulder like any ordinary afternoon, and sat on the trailer steps, staring at Biscuit for a long time. A double wall. A hidden door. A padlocked room sealed behind 12-foot brick. And somewhere inside, a human being knocking for help for years. And then, for the second time in a week, a memory came back to him. A memory he had buried so deep he had almost forgotten it existed. His mother, Mary Brooks, 20 years ago, had worked as a housemaid in that very mansion. Sweeping, mopping, polishing brass fittings for the Whitfield family. Tyler had been 3 years old then, and he barely remembered it. But once, years later, When Mary was sick and running a bad fever, she had said something strange and dreamlike to him in the kitchen of their trailer. "Tyler, baby, in that big white house I used to clean, I heard somebody crying behind a wall one time. I swore to God I heard it," I told Mr. Whitfield, and that same evening he fired me and threw my things out the gate, called me crazy, told the agency never to send me back. Mary had shaken her head then, laughed weakly at herself, and said, "Old hospital medicine is talking, baby. Don't listen to Mama." But Mary had not been hallucinating. Mary had heard the truth 20 years ago, and the richest man in Savannah had thrown her out on the street for hearing it. And Biscuit. Biscuit was Mary's cat. Tyler did the math slowly, his hands cold. Mary had been pregnant with Tyler when she worked at the Whitfield mansion. The cat had been there too, just a kitten then, living in the servant quarters, roaming the side yard at night. When Mary was fired, Biscuit had come with her to Pine Hollow. Mary had raised that cat for 20 years, and that cat had heard the knocking from inside that wall 20 years ago, the same way Mary had, and that cat had never, ever forgotten it. What Mary left unfinished because she was silenced, the cat had carried on alone, every night, for 3 straight years after Mary's death, knocking for the knocking, answering the woman no human being in Savannah would answer. Tyler sat on those trailer steps and cried for the first time since his mother's funeral. And then he stood up, wiped his face on his sleeve, and picked up his phone. There was a journalist in Savannah named Mike Hartley. 45 years old, worked for the Times Savannah Morning Herald, covered local corruption and cold cases. 2 years ago, when Mary Brooks had died in that county hospital, Mike Hartley had written a short sympathetic piece about the single mother with breast cancer who could not afford treatment. Nothing had come of it, but Tyler had kept the reporter's business card in an old coffee tin on the kitchen counter. Tyler dialed the number with trembling fingers. "Mr. Hartley, you probably don't remember me. I'm Tyler Brooks. You wrote about my mother 2 years ago, the cancer piece." There was a pause on the line, and then Mike's voice came back softer. "Tyler, son, how are you holding up?" "Mr. Hartley, I need you to listen to me, and I need you not to hang up. There is a human being locked behind the western wall of Harrison Whitfield's mansion in Ardsley Park. I have heard the knocking for 3 nights in a row. I have a phone recording. The wall is double-layered. There's a hidden door inside. And 20 years ago, my mother heard the same knocking when she worked in that house as a maid, and Whitfield fired her the same evening. Please, sir, do not hang up on me. Do. There was a long silence on the line. Then Mike Hartley said slowly, carefully, "Tyler, I have covered this city for 22 years. Harrison Whitfield is the most powerful man in Georgia. If you are wrong, if this is a story you are imagining, he will bury both of us before sundown tomorrow. If you are right, we are about to open the biggest case this city has seen in 100 years. Play me the recording, right now." Tyler played it. 15 seconds of faint, steady knocking through the brick. Mike Hartley listened in silence. Then he played it a second time, then a third. Tyler heard him exhale long and slow on the other end of the line. "Tyler, stay in your trailer. Do not go back to that wall alone. I am driving to Pine Hollow tonight with a cameraman. We go in at 2 in the morning, together." At exactly 2 in the morning, a dark sedan rolled quietly into the back alley behind the Whitfield mansion. Mike Hartley stepped out with his cameraman, David, and Tyler was already waiting with Biscuit at his feet. The small brown cat led them to the exact spot, climbed the ledge one more time, and began scratching. From inside the brick wall, faint and steady, came the answer. Knock. 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 David rolled camera. Tyler pulled the loose bricks out one by one, 3, 4, 5, until a gap big enough for a grown man opened in the wall. He crawled through the hollow corridor with a flashlight in his teeth. The rusted iron door stood before him. He smashed the corroded padlock with an iron rod, the sound echoing down the narrow space, and he pushed the door open. What Tyler saw inside almost made the flashlight fall from his hand. A tiny, windowless room, the smell of 40 years of stale air and closed sickness. A sagging bed in the corner. And on the bed, a skeletal old woman, long white hair down to her waist, eyes open but unseeing, pupils destroyed by 4 decades of absolute darkness. Fingers worn down to the bone from knocking the wall year after year. Beneath the bed, a half-eaten tray of food and a water pitcher, enough to keep a human being alive, but never more than that. "Ma'am," Tyler whispered. "Who are you?" The old woman flinched from the flashlight. And then a voice came out of her, cracked, dry, ancient, but clear. "My name is Eleanor Whitfield. I am Harrison Whitfield's wife." Mike Hartley stepped into the doorway, camera rolling, stunned. The wife of the richest man in Georgia, declared dead 40 years ago. Heart attack, open casket, grand funeral. Alive. Eleanor spoke slowly, resting between sentences, relearning how to form words. She had married Harrison at 20. He had been 30. Her father was a Charleston banking magnate, and her dowry had included this mansion, 2 textile mills, and a trust fund worth millions, all in her name. 5 years into the marriage, she asked for a divorce. Harrison beat her, cheated on her, broke her. She pressed harder. Divorce meant half of everything went back to her. Murder meant prison. So Harrison chose the third road. Sleeping pills in her wine one quiet evening, and when she woke up, she was in this room, locked from the outside. The world was told she died of a heart attack. A closed casket funeral. An empty coffin or someone else's body, she never learned which. For 40 years, a single loyal old servant named Charles had brought her 1 meal a day and never spoken a single word. Tyler asked, "Ma'am, did you know a woman named Mary Brooks? She worked here as a maid 20 years ago." Eleanor paused. "Mary, the kind one." She pressed her ear to the wall one afternoon. I knocked. She heard me. She told Harrison. He threw her out that same evening. And her cat? Small brown kitten. Lived in the back garden. Came to my wall every night. I would whisper through the brick, and she would answer with her claws. When Mary was fired, the cat disappeared. But 3 years ago, she came back. Every single night. Outside the room, Biscuit sat calmly in the doorway looking at Eleanor, as if saying, "I brought him, like I promised." Tyler wrapped a blanket around Eleanor's eyes to protect her from the first light she had seen in 40 years, lifted her gently onto his back, and carried her out through the broken wall into the Georgia night. The stars above Ardsley Park, the cool summer air on her face, and Eleanor Whitfield wept out loud for the first time in 4 decades. By 5 in the morning, Mike Hartley's video went live on the Times Savannah Morning Herald Times website. Savannah's greatest philanthropist hid his wife alive behind a mansion wall for 40 years. By 7, the city was awake and trembling. 3 million views in 2 hours. Every national network rolling trucks toward Ardsley Park. And Harrison Whitfield, 70 years old and unshakable, walked out onto his front steps at 10 and held a press conference in that crisp white shirt. "This is a lie. My wife died 40 years ago. That beggar woman is not Eleanor. This scrap boy Tyler Brooks is trying to extort me. His 3 most expensive attorneys were already filing defamation suits. Mike Hartley made 1 phone call. A civil rights attorney named Diane Cole took the case pro bono, filed an emergency petition in the Georgia Superior Court before Judge Patricia Hayes, and by that same evening the judge ordered an emergency DNA test, seized Harrison's passport, and called in the FBI. Eleanor's DNA was compared against the son, Alexander Whitfield, 45 years old, a businessman living in New York who had grown up believing his mother died when he was 5. 1 week later, the lab report came back. Maternal DNA match confirmed. Eleanor Whitfield is the biological mother of Alexander Whitfield. Harrison's beggar woman lie collapsed in a single page. The FBI sealed the mansion. Forensics entered that hidden room. On the wall beside Eleanor's bed, they found 14,600 tally marks scratched with her fingernails, one for every single day of 40 years. She had counted every sunrise she never saw. They found Charles, the old servant, and he confessed everything. They found the original doctor, now 80 years old, who had forged the death certificate in 1985. They found the whole skeleton of the crime. Georgia Superior Court delivered the verdict 6 months later. Harrison Whitfield, life imprisonment for illegal confinement, attempted murder, death certificate fraud, and property theft. Charles the servant, 10 years. The doctor, 7. All mansion and mill assets transferred back to Eleanor, as they had always been hers by right. But the bittersweet truth was written on Eleanor's face. Her retinas permanently destroyed from 40 years of darkness. Her legs atrophied beyond any recovery. Wheelchair forever. Her vocal cords ruined, only able to whisper. Millions of dollars returned. 40 years of life, never returning. Alexander Whitfield flew in from New York and knelt beside his mother's wheelchair and sobbed, "Mama, they told me you were dead. I never looked for you." Eleanor could not see his face, but she ran her fingers slowly over his cheeks and whispered, "My baby boy, you grew up." Tyler introduced Biscuit. The small brown cat climbed into Eleanor's lap, and Eleanor stroked her with a shaking hand. "It was you, all those nights. You were the only one who heard me, for 40 years. Eleanor insisted Tyler move into the mansion. He refused, said he did not belong there. She whispered, "Boy, your mother was the first human being in this world to hear my voice. You were the one who opened my door. This mansion owes your family a debt that money cannot repay." Tyler moved in. Eleanor sponsored his education. Biscuit now slept in a sunbeam in the very corner of the house that had once held the hidden room, now sealed forever as a crime scene. One evening, a national reporter asked Eleanor on camera, "Ma'am, 40 years in the dark, alone. How did your hope not break?" Eleanor closed her blind eyes and whispered, "My hope broke many, many times, but every single night I would hear it on the wall. Scratch, 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 a small animal's claws. And I would think, someone out there knows I am alive. And as long as someone knows, there is still hope. A cat kept me alive for 40 years. No human would listen, but a cat never stopped listening." Friends, like this video, comment below. Salute to Biscuit, Mary, and Eleanor. Share this with anyone who believes animals are just dumb creatures. Subscribe for more true-hearted American stories. Remember this, animals do not speak, but they hear. They do not understand our words, but they know our pain. And when the entire human world forgets, a small animal will keep scratching a wall every night, without tiring, without stopping, until the truth finally comes out.